I wiped my floury hands on my apron and reached for the ringing phone. Laura's Bakery. How can I help you? Mom, it's me. Can you pick me up from soccer practice? Dad forgot again. I sighed, glancing at the clock. Sure, sweetie, I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I hung up, my assistant Megan poked her head around the kitchen door. Everything okay, Laura? Just Mark forgetting the kids again. Can you handle closing up? Megan nodded, and I grabbed my purse, heading out into the crisp autumn air. The drive to the soccer field was quick, and I spotted my daughter, Emma, sitting on the curb, her chin resting on her knees. Hey, kiddo, I called, rolling down the window. Hop in. Emma climbed into the car, her face a storm cloud. Dad never remembers anything anymore. I'm sure he's just busy with work, I said, not entirely believing it myself. How about we stop for ice cream on the way home? Emma's face brightened, and we chatted about her day as we drove to the local ice cream parlor. As we pulled into the driveway at home, I noticed Mark's car was already there. Why don't you go start your homework? I suggested to Emma. I'll bring your ice cream in. I found Mark in his home office, hunched over his drafting table. Hey, I said, leaning against the doorframe. You forgot Emma again. He looked up, genuine surprise on his face. Oh, God, I'm sorry, Laura. I got caught up in this new project and... It's fine, I interrupted, not wanting to hear another excuse. Just try to remember next time, okay? Mark nodded, and I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A small, ornate box sat on the edge of his desk, one I'd never seen before. What's that? I asked, pointing. Mark's eyes widened slightly. Oh, just some old keepsakes. Found them when I was cleaning out the attic last weekend. I reached for the box, but Mark's hand shot out, stopping me. It's nothing interesting, really. Just some old photos and stuff. His reaction piqued my curiosity, but I let it go. Okay, I'm going to check on Emma. That night, after the kids were in bed, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling about that box. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Finally, I slipped out of bed and padded down to Mark's office. The box was still there, tempting me. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside were a few old photos, ticket stubs, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, my heart racing. My dearest Mark, it began. I know we said goodbye, but I can't stop thinking about you. What we had was special, and I'm not ready to let it go. Please meet me at our spot. We need to talk. All my love, Scarlett. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. Scarlett? Who was Scarlett? And why was Mark keeping a love letter from her? The sound of footsteps made me jump. I quickly folded the letter and put it back in the box, closing it just as Mark appeared in the doorway. Laura, what are you doing up? I forced a smile. Just getting some water. Couldn't sleep. As I brushed past him, my mind was reeling. Who was this Scarlett, and what did she mean to Mark? And more importantly, why had he kept this letter hidden all these years? I climbed back into bed, my thoughts a whirlwind. One thing was certain. Our peaceful life was about to change, and I had a feeling it wouldn't be for the better. I couldn't shake the image of that letter from my mind as I pulled into Henry and Karen's driveway. The familiar scent of Karen's roses wafted through the air as I stepped out of the car, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Karen answered the door, her face lighting up. Laura, what a lovely surprise. Come in, dear. I followed her into the living room, where Henry was reading the newspaper. He looked up, his bushy eyebrows raising. Laura, is everything all right? I'm not sure, I admitted, sinking into an armchair. I need to ask you both something, and I need you to be honest with me. Karen and Henry exchanged a glance. Of course, dear, Karen said, sitting down next to her husband. What is it? I took a deep breath. Who's Scarlett? The silence that followed was deafening. Henry's face paled, and Karen's hand flew to her mouth. Where did you hear that name? Henry asked, his voice gruff. I found a letter, I said, my heart pounding. In Mark's things. From her. Karen reached out, patting my hand. Oh, Laura, that was so long ago. We thought it was all in the past. What was in the past? I pressed. Who is she? Henry sighed, setting down his paper. Scarlett was Mark's high school sweetheart. They were inseparable for years. We all thought they'd end up married. What happened? I asked, dreading the answer. She disappeared, Karen said softly. Right after graduation. No note, no explanation. Just gone. I felt a chill run down my spine. And Mark? He was devastated, Henry said. Spent months looking for her. It nearly broke him. Karen nodded. We were so worried, but then he met you and, well, we thought he'd finally moved on. My mind was reeling. Why didn't anyone ever tell me about her? Mark asked us not to, Henry said. Said it was in the past and he wanted to focus on his future with you. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, but he kept her letter, all these years. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Laura, I'm sure it doesn't mean anything. Mark loves you. Does he? I asked, more to myself than to them. If he loved me, why would he keep secrets? Henry stood, placing a hand on my shoulder. People are complicated, Laura. Sometimes we hold on to things we shouldn't, even when we've moved on. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I turned to leave, Karen called out. Laura, wait, there's something else you should know. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. What is it? Karen hesitated, looking at Henry. He nodded, and she continued. About a year before you and Mark met, there were rumors that Scarlett had been seen back in town. My breath caught in my throat. And nothing, Henry said. If she was here, she didn't stay long. Mark never mentioned seeing her. I left their house with more questions than answers, my mind spinning. As I pulled into my own driveway, I saw Mark's car. He was home early. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the house. Mark was in the kitchen, making coffee. Hey, he said, smiling. You're home early. Everything okay? I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for any sign of the man who had been so devastated by Scarlett's disappearance. All I saw was my husband, the father of my children. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. About Scarlett. The coffee mug slipped from Mark's grasp, shattering on the floor. In that moment, I knew. Whatever Mark's relationship with Scarlett had been, it was far from over. The shattered mug lay forgotten at our feet as Mark's face drained of color. Laura, I can explain, he stammered. Then explain, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Explain why you've kept a love letter from your high school sweetheart hidden all these years. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd always found endearing. Now it just made me angry. It's not what you think, Scarlett. She's part of my past, that's all. A past you never told me about, I countered. A past your parents say nearly broke you. His eyes widened. You talked to my parents? I had to, I snapped, since my husband wasn't being honest with me. Mark sighed, sinking into a kitchen chair. I'm sorry, Laura. I should have told you about Scarlett years ago, but it was painful, and I thought it was over. Is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Of course it is. You're my wife, Laura. I love you. I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. Then why keep the letter? Mark hesitated, and in that moment, I knew there was more. Mark, I said, my voice hardening, what aren't you telling me? He stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. About a year before we met, Scarlett came back to town. My heart sank. Your mother mentioned rumors, but she said you never saw her. Mark's face contorted with guilt. I lied to them. I did see her. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the counter for support. And nothing happened, he said quickly. We talked. She apologized for leaving, but I was still angry, still hurt. I told her I never wanted to see her again. But you kept her letter, I said, the pieces slowly falling into place. You kept it all this time. Mark reached for me, but I stepped back. Laura, please. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a reminder of a different time in my life. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. No, Mark, it's more than that. You've been holding on to her all these years, even if you didn't realize it. His face crumpled. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. And now I don't know if I can trust you. I turned to leave, but Mark's next words stopped me cold. There's something else. I slowly faced him, dread pooling in my stomach. What? Mark's eyes were filled with tears. When Scarlett came back, she wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat. What do you mean? She had a baby with her, Mark said, his voice barely audible. A little boy. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Are you saying? Mark nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know for sure, but the timing fits, and he looked so much like me. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. You have a son? With Scarlett? I don't know, Mark said, reaching for me again. I swear, Laura, I never saw them again after that day. I didn't want to know. But I was beyond hearing his explanations. My entire world had just shattered, and I couldn't breathe. Without a word, I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, ignoring Mark's calls behind me. As I drove aimlessly through town, tears blurring my vision, one thought kept repeating in my mind. My husband might have another family. A family he'd kept secret for over 20 years. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed answers, and I knew there was only one person who could give them to me. With trembling fingers, I searched online for Scarlett in our town. And there she was. Scarlett Anderson, owner of a local art gallery. Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed in the address and started the car. It was time to meet the woman who had haunted my marriage for far too long. My heart pounded as I stood outside Scarlett's art gallery. The closed sign hung in the window, but I could see movement inside. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. A woman with long auburn hair opened the door, her green eyes widening in surprise. "I'm sorry, we're closed." "Are you Scarlett?" I interrupted, my voice shaking. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I am. And you are?" "Laura," I said, watching her face carefully. Mark's wife." The color drained from Scarlett's face. She stepped back, allowing me inside. "I think we need to talk." The gallery was filled with vibrant paintings, but I barely noticed them as I followed Scarlett to a small office in the back. She gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, too agitated to be still. "I assume Mark told you about me," Scarlett said softly. I laughed bitterly. "No, actually. I found your letter, the one you wrote him years ago." Scarlett's eyes widened. "He kept that, after all this time?" "Apparently," I said, my anger rising. "What I want to know is why you came back, why you showed up with a baby and turned Mark's life upside down." Scarlett flinched. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was young and scared when I left. When I came back, I thought Mark deserved to know the truth." "And what truth is that?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. Before Scarlett could respond, the office door opened. A young man walked in, his features so familiar it took my breath away. He was the spitting image of Mark at that age. "Mom?" he said, looking between us with confusion. "Is everything okay?" Scarlett's face paled further. "Ashton, honey, could you give us a minute?" But I couldn't take my eyes off him. "You're Mark's son," I whispered. Ashton's eyes widened. "What? Mom, what's she talking about?" Scarlett stood, placing a hand on Ashton's arm. "Ash, this is Laura. She's Mark's wife." The room spun as I watched understanding dawn on Ashton's face. He looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mark, the man you told me about? He's my father?" Scarlett nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ash. I never meant for you to find out like this." I stumbled backwards, gripping the edge of a desk for support. This was real. Mark had a son, a grown son he'd never known. "How could you keep this from him?" I asked Scarlett, my voice breaking. "From both of them." Scarlett's face crumpled. "I tried to tell Mark when I came back, but he was so angry, so hurt. He said he never wanted to see me again. I couldn't force him to be a father if he didn't want to be." Ashton's face hardened. "So you lied to me my whole life instead?" "I thought I was protecting you," Scarlett said, reaching for him, but Ashton stepped back. "I need some air," he muttered, brushing past me and out of the office. I watched him go, my heart aching for this young man whose world had just been shattered. Then I turned back to Scarlett. "Does Mark know?" I asked. "Does he know for certain that Ashton is his son?" Scarlett shook her head. "I never told him explicitly, but I think he must have suspected." The weight of everything crashed down on me, my marriage, my life, everything I thought I knew had been built on lies and secrets. "I can't do this," I said, more to myself than to Scarlett. "I can't pretend this isn't happening." Scarlett stepped towards me, her face etched with guilt. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not you or Ashton." But her words barely registered, piecing together a plan. I knew what I had to do. "Mark's birthday is next week," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's going to be a party. I think you and Ashton should come." Scarlett's eyes widened in shock. "What, Laura, I don't think that's a good idea." "No," I cut her off. "It's time for the truth to come out. All of it. No more secrets, no more lies." As I walked out of the gallery, leaving a stunned Scarlett behind, I felt a strange sense of calm. The worst had happened, and I had survived. Now it was time to take control of my life again. And it would start with Mark's birthday party. I sat across from Hazel in her law office, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The events of the past few days tumbled out of me in a rush, leaving me breathless and on the verge of tears. Hazel leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. Laura, I'm so sorry you're going through this. It's a lot to process. I laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. My whole life feels like a lie. Have you talked to Mark since you found out about Ashton? Hazel asked gently. I shook my head. I've been staying at my sister's. I can't face him right now. Hazel nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. And what about the birthday party? Are you still planning to go through with it? I have to, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I can't keep living like this, pretending everything's fine when it's not. I need the truth to come out. Are you sure that's wise? Hazel cautioned. Exposing everything at a public event could have serious consequences. I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. What about the consequences I'm already facing? The lies, the betrayal? I can't just sweep it under the rug. Hazel sighed, leaning forward. Laura, as your friend, I understand your pain. But as a lawyer, I have to advise you to think carefully about your next steps. If you're considering divorce. Divorce. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even allowed myself to think that far ahead. It's a possibility you need to consider, Hazel said gently, and if that's the case, exposing Mark publicly could complicate legal proceedings. I stood up, pacing the office. So what am I supposed to do? Just pretend I don't know about his secret son? Act like my marriage isn't falling apart? Hazel stood, placing a comforting hand on my arm. No, of course not. But there might be a better way to handle this, one that protects you and your children. I froze. Oh God, the kids. How am I going to tell them about all this? One step at a time, Hazel soothed. First, I think you need to have an honest conversation with Mark, away from the party, away from Scarlett and Ashton. Just the two of you. I shook my head, tears spilling over. I don't know if I can face him alone. I'm so angry, Hazel, and hurt. What if I say something I can't take back? That's why I'm here, Hazel said, squeezing my arm. If you want, I can be present as a mediator, to keep things civil and protect your interests. I considered her words, my mind racing. The thought of confronting Mark was terrifying, but the alternative, continuing to live in this limbo of secrets and lies, was unbearable. Okay, I said finally. I'll talk to him, but I'm not backing down on the party. Scarlett and Ashton deserve to know the truth, too. Hazel nodded, a hint of worry in her eyes. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't do anything rash. As I left Hazel's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Please come home. We need to talk. My heart raced as I typed out a reply. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Bring the truth this time. I drove home in a daze, my mind whirling with possibilities. What would happen tomorrow? Could my marriage survive this? And what about Ashton, the son Mark never knew he had? As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a figure sitting on the front steps. It was Ashton. He stood as I approached, his face a mirror of Mark's at that age. Mrs. Walker, I'm sorry to show up like this, but I need to know the truth about everything. I looked into his eyes, Mark's eyes, and made a decision. The time for secrets was over. Come inside, Ashton, I said, unlocking the door. I think we both deserve some answers. The day of Mark's birthday party arrived, and my stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. I'd spent the past week in a haze of anger and confusion, avoiding Mark's calls and throwing myself into party preparations. Now, as I arranged the last of the decorations, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The doorbell rang, and I froze. It was too early for guests. My heart pounding, I opened the door to find Scarlett standing there, looking as nervous as I felt. Laura, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I think we need to talk before everyone else arrives. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. As she passed, I caught a whiff of her perfume, the same scent that had lingered on that old love letter. My fists clenched involuntarily. Where's Ashton? I asked, leading her to the kitchen. Scarlett's eyes widened. He's coming later. I wanted to speak with you alone first. I turned to face her, crossing my arms. What could you possibly have to say to me? She took a deep breath. I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. When I came back all those years ago, I truly believed Mark deserved to know about Ashton, but when he reacted so angrily, I thought it was best to keep my distance. And now, I challenged, why come back into our lives now? Scarlett's eyes filled with tears. Ashton started asking questions. About his father, about his past. I couldn't keep lying to him, and then when you showed up at the gallery, I realized it was time for the truth to come out. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Mark's voice called out, "Laura, are you here?" Scarlett and I froze, staring at each other in panic. Footsteps approached the kitchen, and then Mark appeared in the doorway. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. "Scarlett?" he gasped. "What are you doing here?" I watched as a myriad of emotions flashed across Mark's face. Shock, confusion, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like longing. "I invited her," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And Ashton, too. I thought it was time we all had an honest conversation." Mark's face paled. "Ashton? He's coming here?" Scarlett nodded, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. "He wants to meet you, Mark. He deserves to know his father." The word father hung in the air between us, heavy with 2 decades of secrets and lies. I watched as Mark stumbled backwards, gripping the doorframe for support. "Laura," he said, his voice breaking. "I can explain. I never meant to." "Save it," I cut him off. "I don't want to hear any more lies. Tonight we're going to tell everyone the truth. All of it." Mark's eyes darted between Scarlett and me, panic evident on his face. "You can't be serious. What about the kids? What about our family?" "Our family?" I laughed bitterly. "Our family has been built on lies, Mark. It's time for that to end." Just then the doorbell rang again. The first guests were arriving. Mark looked at me pleadingly, but I turned away, heading for the door. "Laura, wait," Scarlett called out. I paused, looking back at her. "Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." I met her gaze, then Mark's. In that moment, I saw the full weight of their shared history, the secrets they'd kept, and the lives they'd changed. And I knew, with absolute certainty, what I had to do. "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "It's time for the truth, no matter the cost." As I opened the door to greet our guests, I could feel the tension radiating from the kitchen. The stage was set, the players were in place, and in just a few short hours everything would change. Let the party begin. The party was in full swing, but I felt like I was moving through a fog. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Mark stood across the room, his eyes darting nervously between me, Scarlett, and the door. I watched as Ashton arrived, his resemblance to Mark even more striking in the warm light of our living room. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd as people noticed the uncanny similarity. "Laura?" Hazel appeared at my elbow, her voice low and urgent. "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to handle this privately." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "No, Hazel. No more secrets. No more lies." Taking a deep breath, I clinked my glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Mark's birthday," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "But before we continue, there's something you all need to know." Mark stepped forward, panic etched on his face. "Laura, please." "No, Mark," I cut him off. "It's time for the truth." I turned back to the crowd, my gaze finding Scarlett and Ashton. "Many of you may have noticed a new face here tonight. This is Ashton, and he has a very special connection to our family." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the room. I saw Henry and Karen exchange worried glances. "Ashton," I continued, "is Mark's son. A son he never knew he had, because his mother, Scarlett, left town before telling Mark she was pregnant." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. I watched as shock, disbelief, and dawning understanding played across the faces of our friends and family. Mark stepped forward, his face ashen. "Laura, I can explain." "Can you?" I challenged, my voice rising. "Can you explain why you kept Scarlett's letter all these years? Why you never told me about her, or about the possibility that you had a child out there?" Scarlett moved to stand beside Ashton, who looked shell-shocked. "I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting everyone by staying away." "Protecting us?" I laughed bitterly. "You've torn our lives apart." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the judgment, the pity, but I wasn't done. "For years," I continued, my voice breaking, "I thought I knew who my husband was. I thought we had built a life together based on trust and honesty, but it was all a lie." Mark reached for me, his eyes pleading. "Laura, please, I love you. I never meant to hurt you." I stepped back out of his reach. "If you loved me, you would have told me the truth. You would have given me the chance to understand, to forgive." Ashton spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to know where I came from." My heart broke for him, for the innocent victim in all of this. "I know, Ashton, and you deserve the truth, just like the rest of us." I turned back to the stunned crowd. "I'm sorry to ruin the party, but I couldn't keep living this lie. Mark and Scarlett may have started this, but I'm ending it, here and now." With shaking hands, I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table. The soft clink seemed to echo in the silent room. "Happy birthday, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I hope the truth was worth it." As I turned to leave, the room erupted into chaos. I could hear Mark calling my name, Scarlett's sobs, and the shocked exclamations of our guests. But I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool night air, feeling both utterly broken and strangely free. The truth was out, the secrets exposed. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of the lies that had consumed it. The weeks following Mark's birthday party were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and endless conversations with Hazel about divorce proceedings. I threw myself into my work at the bakery, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of kneading dough and decorating cakes. One quiet afternoon, as I was closing up shop, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up to see Ashton standing there, looking uncertain. "Mrs. Walker, Laura," he began. "I hope it's okay that I'm here. I wanted to talk to you." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit at one of the small tables. "Of course, Ashton. What's on your mind?" He fidgeted with a napkin, his eyes, so like Mark's, filled with a mix of emotions. "I wanted to apologize for everything that's happened. I never meant to cause so much pain." My heart ached for this young man, caught in the middle of a mess he didn't create. "Ashton, none of this is your fault. You have nothing to apologize for." He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I always wondered about my father, but I never imagined finding him would destroy a family." I reached out, covering his hand with mine. "You didn't destroy anything, Ashton. The lies and secrets did that long before you came into the picture." We talked for hours about his life growing up, about Scarlett, about Mark. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bakery floor, I felt something shift inside me. A weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying began to lift. The next day, I met with Mark at Hazel's office to finalize our separation agreement. As we sat across from each other, the man I'd loved for so many years looked older, worn down by the weight of his secrets. "Laura," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know I've hurt you beyond forgiveness, but I want you to know that I truly do love you." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of emotions wash over me, anger, sadness, and surprisingly, a glimmer of understanding. "I believe you, Mark," I said softly, "but love isn't enough when there's no trust. We can't go back to what we were." He nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I know, I just hope, someday, you can forgive me." As I signed the papers, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for our story, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter. Weeks turned into months, and slowly I began to rebuild my life. The bakery thrived, and I found joy in simple pleasures, morning walks, coffee with Hazel, quiet evenings with a good book. And to my surprise, I found myself forming a tentative friendship with Ashton, who had become a regular at the bakery. One sunny afternoon, as I was experimenting with a new recipe, Ashton appeared at the counter, a shy smile on his face. "I was wondering," he said, "if you might need an extra pair of hands around here. I've always loved baking, and well, I thought it might be nice to get to know you better." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. "I'd like that, Ashton. I'd like that very much." As we worked side by side, rolling out dough and sharing stories, I realized that life had a funny way of giving you exactly what you needed, even if it wasn't what you'd expected. The betrayal that had shattered my world had also opened doors I never knew existed. It had shown me my own strength, the depth of my friendships, and the capacity for forgiveness I didn't know I possessed. As I looked at Ashton, laughing as he dusted flour off his nose, I knew that while my marriage to Mark was over, my story was far from finished. There would be more chapters, more twists and turns, more joy and pain. But this time, I would write my own narrative on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where the story would lead.
My name is Sandra, and I am the mother of Michael, a college student who is 18 years old. In order to provide him with a better future, my husband, Brian, and I have been making many sacrifices for years to fund his schooling. These sacrifices have included foregoing holidays and making every effort to restrict our budget. We live in a small but comfortable house that was my grandmother's before she went into a nursing facility. I oversee the front desk at a doctor's office, while Brian works at a nearby hardware shop. We lead a straightforward, uncomplicated lifestyle that works perfectly for us. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, the sun positioned perfectly in the sky, hinting at the weekend ahead, when Brian's phone interrupted the peace. I was preparing dinner, my thoughts split between the meal and our budget, when I heard him answer the call with a concerned, "Hello." "Mom, slow down. What's wrong?" As I watched him pace back and forth, his face drained of color. The call ended, and he collapsed onto the sofa, looking utterly deflated. "It's my parents," he said. "Their business has gone under. They're bankrupt, and they've lost everything, including their house." My heart sank at the news. "Oh, Brian, that's awful. What are they planning to do?" "They want to stay with us for a while," he replied, clearly worried about our reaction. "Just until they sort things out." I paused, considering our already tight finances and the structured piece of our life that was now at risk of being disrupted. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. Brian massaged his neck, a sign of his stress. "I said I'd talk to you first. It's your house too, Sandra. I wouldn't decide this without consulting you." Brian's parents, Terry and Catherine, were far from easygoing, accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle. Our simple home was a stark contrast to what they were used to. You know how they are. This house, it's not really their style, I reminded him. "I know," he replied, his expression troubled. "But they're my parents, Sandra. They're in a tough spot." Recalling the numerous times they had visited, barely concealing their disdain for our humble living arrangements, I knew they would be uncomfortable here. Yet seeing them desperate enough to ask for help softened my stance. "All right, they can stay, but it's temporary, right? Just until they get back on their feet." Brian immediately picked up his phone, and after a brief conversation, he reassured his mother. "Mom, Sandra and I talked it over. You can stay for a bit, but you need to find your place soon. We're not running a hotel." I couldn't hear the response, but Brian's firm, "Yes, Mom, we're clear," told me enough. He hung up, visibly relieved. "They're thankful, Sandra. They'll be here next week." Last week, we told Brian's parents they could stay with us temporarily, and today they were moving in. I stood on the porch, my heart sinking slightly as two large moving trucks rolled up the driveway. Brian, managing a forced smile, directed the unloading process like a parking lot attendant. Terry was the first to emerge, slapping Brian on the back with a grin as if he'd just won the lottery. Catherine approached me next, her perfume overwhelming, as she planted a kiss on my cheek that felt scalding. "You're an angel for letting us invade like this," she said. I managed to smile, my eyes shifting nervously to the mountain of belongings being unloaded, a tangible sign of the upheaval to come. As Catherine and the movers unloaded what she referred to as just the essentials from their moving trucks, I couldn't help but gape at the array of furniture and boxes that seemed to flood our modest front yard. "Is this all just essentials?" I mumbled under my breath, trying hard to keep my tone light. "Oh yes, just the basics for now," Catherine responded nonchalantly, waving her hand as if the mountain of belongings wasn't overtaking every inch of space. I bit my tongue, wondering what they had left in storage and if these were the items deemed necessary for their temporary stay. Brian caught my gaze, and I could tell he shared my concern. "Let's just try to get all this inside," he murmured partly to himself, his tone a mix of resignation and disbelief, as Terry and Catherine directed the movers with a precision that seemed better suited for a luxurious estate than our simple home. The movers struggled past with armchairs, an endless number of boxes, and even a grandfather clock. "Right there, that's perfect." Terry directed them to place the clock as though it was the most natural addition to our living room, which was quickly disappearing under the influx of their possessions. I pulled Brian aside as the movers took a moment to catch their breath. "Brian, this is madness. They've brought enough stuff to furnish an entire house. Where are we supposed to put all of this?" Brian rubbed his temples, a sign of his growing frustration. "I know, Sandra. I'll talk to them, I promise. Let's just get through today." As the movers resumed, our ground floor transformed into a cluttered showcase of Terry and Catherine's old lifestyle. Every corner was filled, every space overtaken. By the time the movers left, our once cozy living room resembled more of a storage unit than a family space. Dinner that night felt like navigating a labyrinth. We barely managed to uncover the dining table beneath all the clutter. Terry and Catherine seemed completely oblivious to the chaos, blissfully chatting about their journey as Terry opened a bottle of pricey French wine. "Sandra, you really should try this," he insisted, pouring a glass with a flourish. "Thank you both so much for having us," Catherine added sweetly, her voice almost too sugary as she continued. "It's just until we find our feet." Brian, clearing his throat nervously, attempted to set some boundaries. "Yeah, about that. We need to talk about some ground rules." Spaces tightened. "Oh, don't worry about it, son," Terry interrupted with a dismissive wave. "We'll manage just fine, won't we, dear?" He smiled at Catherine, who nodded enthusiastically, looking around at the invaded space, the piles of boxes, the ostentatious ornaments displacing our simpler decor. I wasn't so sure about that. Adjusting to life with Terry and Catherine was proving to be more challenging than I'd anticipated. A few days later, as we settled into a new sort of routine, another challenge emerged. It was Tuesday evening, and I was preparing a simple dinner, spaghetti, when Catherine walked into the kitchen, her nose wrinkling in disdain. "What's that smell?" she asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. "It's dinner," I replied, striving to keep my voice calm. "Spaghetti." "Where's the meat?" "The fresh herbs?" she scoffed, peering over my shoulder with a critical eye. Brian, hearing the commotion, came in, drying his hands on a dish towel. "What's the problem?" "The problem, Brian, is that we're expected to eat this." Catherine gestured dramatically towards the pot of simmering sauce as though it were unsavory. Taking a deep breath to maintain my composure, I explained, "It's what we usually eat. We can't afford steaks and fancy meals every night." As tensions flared in the kitchen, Brian intervened, his expression stern. "Mom, this is Sandra's home too, and this meal is what we normally eat. If you prefer something else, feel free to cook it yourself," he said firmly. Catherine's eyes narrowed as she retorted. The stark difference was not just in our meals, but was etching a deeper divide between us. Each day, unable to contain my frustration any longer, I spoke up. "This has to stop. We can't keep living like this, eating different meals. It's ridiculous. From now on, everyone in this house will eat the same food, and we will stick to what we can afford." Terry left dismissively, a grating sound that tested my last nerve. "You expect us to eat that slop?" "It's not slop, it's dinner. It's what we eat," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. Terry's laughter stopped abruptly, his face turning into a scowl. Catherine's tone was sharp and accusing. How can you be so greedy and lazy? Cooking decent food isn't that hard. They both turned to Brian, their expressions full of expectation, as if prompting him to side with them. That was the final straw for Brian. He slammed his hand down on the table, causing the plates to clatter. First off, this is Sandra's house as much as mine, and you will treat her with respect, he declared, his voice resonant with authority. Catherine's eyes welled with tears, her voice quivering as the impact of Brian's words sank in. I never thought I'd see the day when you, my son, would shout at me like that. Terry's frustration had reached a boiling point as he stood there, pointing his finger accusingly at Brian. Look at you, completely whipped and following her every command. Is this really who you've become? I maintained my composure, though my heart raced. Enough. This conversation is finished. From now on, no more lavish spending on steaks or seafood. We all eat the same simple meals. Their stares could have frozen the room in that moment of stillness. Then silently, Terry and Catherine pushed their chairs back and left the table. Brian and I sat back down, enveloped in the heavy silence. He reached out and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry it came to this, he said. I nodded, feeling the burden of the evening's events. I am too, but it's the right choice. We can't go on like this. After the dinner blow-up, the atmosphere at home cooled, but only superficially. Terry and Catherine were noticeably quieter, but their silence had an underlying tension that kept me on edge. I sensed they weren't ready to accept the new household rules without a fight. A few days later, as I was cleaning up from a simple lunch of sandwiches, the doorbell rang. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the front door, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I found a delivery man with a large fragrant bag from a fancy local restaurant. Delivery for Sandra, he announced, checking his clipboard. Confused, I said, there must be some mistake. I didn't order this. Just then, Catherine appeared with an overly bright smile. Oh, I decided to treat us to a nice meal. We deserved a little comfort after all the tension, she explained. I took the bag with hesitation. Catherine, we discussed this. We're cutting back on expenses. She avoided my gaze, shrugging. I thought it was on your tab, dear. My mistake. Brian entered from the kitchen, catching the tail end of our conversation. What's going on? He asked. Your mother thinks we deserved an expensive lunch, I replied, the weight of the bag suddenly feeling even heavier. Brian's expression darkened. Mom, we agreed no more of this. Terry's voice boomed from the hallway. What harm is a little lunch going to do? You can't expect us to live like hermits forever. I placed the bag down, feeling my frustration rise. It's not just the lunch, it's every unnecessary expense. We've already told you we're sticking to a budget. Catherine's demeanor turned icy. If you're going to fuss over a simple meal, perhaps we won't bother next time. Brian pinched the bridge of his nose, exasperated. It's not just about the meal. It's about respecting the household rules. You can't keep undermining us. The argument circled for a few more minutes until Terry and Catherine withdrew to their room, leaving the untouched, costly lunch on the table. Brian and I exchanged glances, a silent agreement between us that this couldn't continue. I'll call the restaurant, explain the situation, and cancel any future orders made without our approval, I declared, picking up the phone. Brian nodded, his resolve firm. I'll have another talk with them. This sneaky behavior has to stop. The peace was fleeting. After the incident with the unauthorized lunch, Catherine and Terry simmered with barely concealed resentment. The tension was palpable, and it felt as though you could slice through it with a knife. One evening, while I was washing dishes, the calm shattered once more. Brian had just come in from the yard, looking tired. I was about to ask him about his day when a sudden crash from the living room had us both sprinting to investigate. We discovered Terry looming over a shattered vase, one of the few household treasures I deeply valued. "What just happened?" Brian asked, his voice measured despite the chaos. "It just slipped out of my hand," Terry responded, his eyes barely reflecting any remorse. His tone wasn't one of apology. Rather, it carried a defiant edge. Brian crouched to collect the broken pieces, and I couldn't keep quiet any longer. This vase was an heirloom from my grandmother. It has more history with this house than all of us. Catherine, leaning against the doorway dismissively, said, "It's just a vase. You can always find another." "That's not the point, Catherine." I shot back, irritation rising in me. "This is about respect, something that's evidently lacking around here." "You want to talk respect?" Terry retorted, raising his voice. "How about the way you treat us like we're second-rate residents in our own home?" Brian rose to his feet and faced his father directly. "You're here because we allow it, Dad. Don't forget that." "It doesn't feel like we're allowed anything." Catherine interjected sharply. "It feels like we're merely tolerated." Living with Terry and Catherine felt like navigating a field of landmines, but one particular evening drove me to my limit. We were sitting at the dinner table, the epicenter of many past disputes, when Catherine dropped her astonishing new request. "Brian, I saw a lovely coat today, and I think we should use Michael's college fund to buy it," she said as nonchalantly as if she were talking about changing coffee brands. I choked on my drink, coughing as I set my glass down forcefully. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" My voice was a mixture of disbelief and escalating fury. With a sweet smile, Catherine mistook my astonishment for acquiescence. "It's only money, dear. Michael can take out loans for college. I do need a new coat." Brian, who had been silently fuming, slammed his fork down. "Mom, that's not happening. That fund is for our son's future, not for your shopping spree." Catherine's expression turned sour. "How can you deny your mother such a simple thing?" "It's not simple, and we're not discussing this further," I declared, my last shred of patience dissolving. Terry raised his voice, now echoing off the walls. "You're being unreasonable and cruel. We are your family." He then threatened coldly, "Perhaps the local news would be interested in how you treat your parents. What would your employers think?" The mix of anger and apprehension roiled within me, but my resolve hardened enough. I stood up, my voice firm. "This is not how a family behaves. You two need to look for another place to stay. This arrangement isn't working." Catherine started crying, assuming the role of the aggrieved, while Terry continued his barrage of accusations and threats. The dinner ended with them leaving the room in a huff, and Brian and I were left in a deafening silence. Once the house quieted, I retreated to our bedroom and called my grandmother. She answered after a few rings, her voice a soothing balm. "Grandma, it's Sandra," I began, my voice choked with emotion. "What's troubling you, my dear?" she inquired, instantly concerned. I spilled everything. The incessant demands, the threats, the untenable situation with Catherine and Terry. She listened quietly, her occasional murmur a comforting presence. When I finished, she spoke decisively. "I'll come and stay with you for a few months." "Are you sure, Grandma? What about the nursing home?" "I'm certain. It sounds like you need me right now." When Grandma declared she wouldn't stand by while our family was in turmoil, her voice was resolute and full of determination. Her arrival felt like a refreshing breeze had blown through our tense home. Although age had slowed her physically, her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. Terry and Catherine were noticeably discomforted by her sudden presence. Their unease was palpable. "I'll be staying on the ground floor," Grandma announced authoritatively as she entered, her suitcase trailing behind her like a faithful pet. "I expect we might need to rearrange some things." Terry's irritation was thinly veiled behind a forced smile. "Of course, we'll make sure you're comfortable, right?" He looked towards Catherine, who nodded rigidly, her eyes darting about, likely calculating the inconvenience this rearrangement would pose. Feeling a surge of relief, I was grateful that someone was finally setting things straight. Once the movers had adjusted our living space to accommodate Grandma, she wasted no time in calling a family meeting. Now, I've heard a lot from Sandra about the ongoing issues, and I'm far from pleased, she began sternly, cutting through any semblance of pleasantries. Terry started to object, but Grandma raised her hand, silencing him. "I'm not finished. Technically, this house is still under my name, and while I've allowed Sandra and Brian to stay here rent-free, that privilege doesn't extend to you too." Catherine's face paled. "You want us to pay rent," she blurted out. "Yes, I do. $5,500 a month," Grandma stated flatly. "That's outrageous." Terry protested, standing up abruptly. "Considering the expenses you've incurred, it seems you could manage by reducing some of your luxuries," Grandma retorted sharply. "But we're family," Catherine interjected, her voice shaky. "Family doesn't take advantage of each other," Grandma countered firmly. "Since you've been living beyond your means at my granddaughter's expense, I find it only fair." Terry and Catherine were speechless, exchanging glances as if searching for an escape but finding none. "And one more thing," Grandma continued. "If you find the rent too steep, you're welcome to look for another place to live. Alternatively, if you choose to stay, you'll assist me daily. I need help moving around, meals prepared, and someone to ensure I take my medications." Catherine's earlier bravado had completely vanished. She looked like a fish out of water. Terry, who had always valued his independence, seemed as if he'd been struck. "Think it over," Grandma concluded, her voice softening slightly. "I need your decision by tomorrow morning." As they retreated to their room, presumably to discuss their limited options, Grandma turned to us, her expression gentler. "Don't worry, kids. We'll sort this mess out." The morning after, Grandma laid out her new house rules. It was as if a switch had been flipped in Terry and Catherine. I entered the kitchen to find them packing their belongings, a growing pile of boxes near the door. "We've decided to move out," Terry declared, not looking up from the box he was sealing. "We found a small apartment. We'll take our things and go." Catherine was busier stuffing items into bags with swift, sharp movements. "It's for the best," she muttered, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity as boxes and furniture moved out the door. Brian helped more out of a sense of duty than desire, as our home finally began to feel like a sanctuary again. By mid-afternoon, the section of the house that Terry and Catherine had occupied was eerily silent, a testament to their swift exit. The echo of their departure lingered long after they had driven away. Grandma, who had been observing quietly from her chair, gave me a knowing look. "Well, that's that then. They'll be all right, you know. Sometimes a bit of hardship is necessary to bring people back down to earth." We later learned that they had sold most of their possessions to cover the rent and their other debts. The luxurious lifestyle they were accustomed to had been pared down to the essentials, much like their new modest apartment. Grandma stayed with us for another 3 weeks, her presence a comforting constant in our home. But eventually, she decided it was time to return to her nursing home. Driving her back, I felt a blend of sadness and relief wash over me. "Thanks for everything, Grandma. We couldn't have managed without you," I told her. She waved off my thanks with a chuckle. Oh, nonsense. You're stronger than you think. Just remember to stand up for yourselves. No one else will do it for you. Her words bolstered my confidence. I said farewell to her, assuring her that I would come back to visit soon. As I made my way back home, the space seemed more expansive and the silence deeper than before. That evening, Brian and I settled into our porch chairs, the gentle evening breeze comforting us. Life had certainly presented its challenges, but we had managed to navigate them successfully and were prepared for what lay ahead. We were confident in our ability to face the future as a team, regardless of what anyone else thought.
The kid's mom is infertile and old. The kid must be disabled anyway. I ran into my ex-husband by chance 4 years after our divorce. He was walking in front of the station arm in arm with a young woman. I never wanted to see him again, but it couldn't be helped. There I was, unable to run away, holding my 3-year-old son's hand. Is that kid mine? I told you not to have it. It's none of your business anymore, is it? Sure, I have no intention of acknowledging him. Just don't bother me. He's just the worst kind of man. Deep down, I'm so glad I left him. But the woman next to my ex has been acting strange this whole time. Her face is pale, and her lips are trembling. She's frightened. Is that your child? She muttered. Who could have imagined the turmoil my son and I were about to be drawn into? My name is Natalie, a 46-year-old office worker. Now it's just me and my 3-year-old son Max living together. He was born when I was 43, through a pregnancy at an advanced age, but he's growing up healthy and strong, which makes me incredibly happy. I often think to myself how glad I am to have had him. When the biological father found out I was pregnant, he told me to get an abortion. Those were truly tough and painful days. I was reminiscing about those hellish days. After graduating from college, I got a job at a company and worked as the CEO's secretary. I hate to toot my own horn, but I was good at being considerate, and the CEO valued me highly. During that time, I met the CEO's son, Ethan. It's Ethan's eye, Natalie. It was love at first sight. Please marry me, Ethan said. Raised in a privileged environment, Ethan had his unreliable moments, but that only tickled my maternal instincts, and I agreed to marry him. Since I was already favored by Ethan's father, the CEO, he quickly approved of our marriage. Marrying a reliable person like Natalie will surely settle Ethan down. I'm really glad, Natalie. Please take care of him. Thank you. I'm happy to hear you say that, Ethan's father said. Ethan wanted me to support him at home, so I quit my job and became a full-time homemaker. I'm the eldest son, so I plan to take over my father's company in the future. Please support me. Understood. I'll support you with all I've got, I replied. My in-laws were very kind and we had a harmonious relationship, so I started living with them right after getting married. However, my mother-in-law was frail and needed care, which was unfortunate. My father-in-law was very kind to her, always speaking to her gently, and we wanted to be a couple like them, but that dream was not to be. My Phil was a very wealthy man, and we had an elderly living helper named Grace. Grace and I took care of my mother-in-law and the household chores. Grace was a good person, and we lived together, helping each other out like a real family, I recalled. Natalie, thank you always. I only had a son, so having you feels like having a real daughter, and it makes me happy. Thank you. Grace expressed her gratitude. I lost my parents early in an accident, so I was raised by my grandparents. My grandparents passed away, as if they were waiting for me to find a job. So I was truly grateful to have met my in-laws, I reflected. My married life was smooth sailing, but my husband's business affairs were not going so well. Though my husband intended to take over the company, his father felt Ethan was not up to the task in terms of management. As a result, my father-in-law was quite strict in his guidance towards Ethan, I explained. A few years later, ominous clouds began to gather over my marriage. Even after 5 years of marriage, we were unable to have children. Ethan blamed me. Why can't you have kids? All my friends had kids right after getting married. It's embarrassing that I'm the only one without kids. That's not fair. It's wrong to just decide it's my fault. There's no way the problem is with me. It has to be your fault, Ethan lamented. The conversation was futile. He baselessly decided that the infertility was my fault. While my husband was like this, my in-laws never pressured us about having children. I could tell they were considerate of me. They must have wanted to see their grandchildren too. Linda, I'm sorry we haven't been able to give you a grandchild yet. What are you talking about? It's not your fault, Natalie. That's right. Children are a blessing, and it's okay if we don't have them. We're just happy to have you with us, my mother-in-law said. My in-law said this, but I wanted children too, and I wanted to give them grandchildren. So I started considering infertility treatment. However, my husband was not very enthusiastic about it. But I insisted, and he accompanied me to the hospital for an examination. The results showed that I had a condition that made my fallopian tubes prone to blockage, making it difficult for me to conceive. See, I knew the problem was with you. I regret marrying you. It's like I drew the short straw. This is so frustrating. My husband blamed me, as if he had been proven right. But it was also found that he had a condition that made it difficult to conceive. His sperm count was low, and their motility was poor. What? No way. However, the doctor said it wasn't entirely impossible, so we were advised to continue treatment. I wanted to continue the treatment, but my husband was against it. I don't want to undergo such treatment. It's not like it's impossible for us to have kids. More than 10 years passed, and we remained childless. My husband had stopped saying he wanted children. Although my relationship with my in-laws was good, my relationship with my husband had become strained. He started coming home late at night, often after drinking, and his work was fraught with failures. He was frequently scolded by his father, the president, and was always in a bad mood. It's your fault for not supporting me as my wife. He would lash out at me like that. Then, at the age of 43, I miraculously became pregnant. I was so happy and relieved that the difficult infertility treatment had paid off. I couldn't help but cry. I thought he would be happy, so I told my husband. But his reaction was unexpected. Good news? Happy for you? I'm pregnant. Bringing this up now? What am I supposed to say? What, are you happy? Do you even realize how old you are? You're a 43-year-old woman. Don't you know there are risks with late pregnancies? What do you mean? I asked. It means the child could have disabilities. I want you to get an abortion. What? I've decided to marry a younger woman who doesn't have these risks. Let's get a divorce. I'll give you alimony. How could he say such a thing? I felt like I had been thrown from heaven to hell. Unable to bear it, I decided to pack my things and leave the house. But first, I had to say goodbye to my in-laws. They were shocked by the sudden news. They asked me to stay and have the grandchild here, but living with my husband had become unbearable. Ignoring my in-laws' pleas, I left the house after receiving the alimony. I signed the divorce papers, changed my phone number, and cut ties with my in-laws. I heard my husband plan to remarry the new secretary his father had hired. It's a trivial matter now, but it seems my husband has a thing for secretaries. It would probably be uncomfortable for his new partner if I were around. I gave birth to my baby on my own. It was a beautiful baby boy. Raising a child alone was challenging, but my son was irreplaceably precious to me. One day, when my son was 3 years old, I unexpectedly ran into my ex-husband in front of the station. Isn't that Natalie? Hearing a familiar voice, I had a bad feeling. I gripped my son Max's hand tightly. Seeing Max, my ex laughed and said, "Given the IVF and your age, the kid's probably got problems, huh?" My ex was walking arm in arm with a young woman. Could she be his new wife? I never wanted to see him again, but it couldn't be helped. There I was, unable to run away, holding my 3-year-old son's hand. "Is that kid mine? I told you not to have him. It's none of your business anymore, is it?" "Sure, I have no intention of acknowledging him. Just don't bother me. He was an awful man, and deep down, I'm so glad I left him. But the woman next to my ex had been acting strange the whole time. Her face pale, her lips trembling. She's frightened. "Is that your child?" she muttered. She was whispering something into my ex-husband's ear. I couldn't hear well because her voice was so low, but I faintly caught the words, "Your father's estate is..." "Huh?" Ethan widened his eyes like saucers and stared intently at my son. Then he glared at me and yelled, "You're a stranger to me now. Don't you dare come near my family's home ever." And with that, the two of them ran off as if they were fleeing from me. What in the world was it about? I couldn't make heads or tails of it. But being told to stay away made me think there must be some secret at my in-laws' place. Curious about my ex and that woman's reactions, I found myself heading to my in-laws' home for the first time in 4 years. The helper Grace greeted me with tears in her eyes, saying, "It's been so long, madam. I'm so glad to see you." My mill had passed away 2 years ago, and my Phil was bedridden due to illness. Seeing me, my Phil was overjoyed despite his frail condition, but he looked haggard, pale, and sick. "You've come at last, Natalie. I've been looking for you everywhere, David. It's been a while. I'm sorry for not visiting sooner." My Phil tenderly stroked Max's head with a look of affection. He then handed me a business card, urging me to visit a lawyer. The lawyer was a close friend of my Phil. Following my father-in-law's advice, I visited the lawyer and was shocked by the startling truth he revealed. 2 months later, I received a call from Grace, the household helper, informing me of my father-in-law's passing. She also shared some intriguing news with me. 3 days later, dressed in mourning clothes and with my son by my side, I headed to the funeral service. The ceremony had already started, with my ex-husband delivering the eulogy. The young woman I had met previously was standing close by him. "My father may have passed away, but I will be taking over the company and protecting it firmly, along with Molly, my father's secretary. We will also build our family together, so I ask for your support." He spoke without shedding a tear, delivering his speech with gusto. During the eulogy, Ethan noticed me and my son and shouted in surprise, "Natalie, what are you doing here? Get out. This place isn't for you." Ethan ordered his employee to drag me out of the funeral hall. I was upset at how rudely my own son was being treated, even though I had Max with me. But I couldn't resist when several men started pulling at my arms. The mourners were shocked by the commotion, looking at us with a buzz of whispers. "Please, everyone, be quiet." The person who stopped the commotion was a lawyer who had been of service to my Phil for many years. "There is a will that the late president asked to be announced at his funeral. Stop it. There's no need to say it. I, his only son, will inherit everything." Ethan tried to stop him, but the lawyer ignored him and began reading the will. The contents were shocking. The company was to be left to the vice president, who had worked hand in hand with the president to grow the company. As for his son Ethan, lacking in managerial talent, he was advised to work under the vice president. His estate was to be left entirely to the child born to his ex-wife, me, if there was one, appointing me as the guardian. I was not surprised, as the lawyer had informed me of everything in advance. But the mourners were in an uproar. Ethan's fiancée bit her lip, her eyes darting around in confusion. She was working as a secretary to my Phil, so it seems that she knew the contents of the will by some means. So when she first saw Max, she was shocked because she thought Max would take away the inheritance. "What about my position? Are people going to jail? Don't I have a position to worry about?" Ethan looked at me, his face turning pale, glaring at me as if he saw a demon. In fact, I had heard from the helper Grace. She saw Ethan and his fiancée Molly putting flowers in my father-in-law's food. Grace found it suspicious and secretly took photos with her cell phone. I got those photos from Grace and, after researching online, discovered that the flower is highly toxic. It's a common flower, but both its stem and root are poisonous, and even drinking water from a vase with this flower can be lethal. "That's a lie. You made this up." Ethan tried to shift the blame onto his fiancée Molly. Molly panicked. "You were the one who said we couldn't become president until your father was gone, and asked for my cooperation. You said you overheard Dad and the lawyer discussing leaving the estate to Natalie's son, which is why I felt I had no choice but to do what I did to Dad. It's your fault. How dare you blame me? You were the one who brought the poisonous flowers, not me. Both of them ended up confessing everything, effectively admitting their guilt in front of all the mourners. Ethan, in a complete about-face, began apologizing to me. Natalie, I'm so sorry. Please tell everyone this was all a lie. My life is over if the police get involved. It's too late for that. I've already submitted the evidence to the police. They should be arriving any minute now. Leaving behind a wailing Molly and a stunned ex-husband, I left the scene. I heard the sound of a police car approaching. I didn't want Max to witness any more of his father's disgrace. Subsequently, my husband and Molly were taken away by the police. The crime of taking his father's life is serious, and he has no remorse, so it will take him many years to get out of the fence. With the inheritance left by my Phil, I bought a house in the suburbs, where I now live with my son. Having witnessed my ex-husband blinded by greed to the extent of harming his own father, I am committed to living a modest life to ensure we don't fall into similar pitfalls. I continue to work as before, pouring love into raising my son. Just seeing my son grow up healthy and happy fills me with contentment, a sentiment that defines my current state of happiness.
The doorbell chimed just as I was sliding the lasagna into the oven. Perfect timing. Dylan had finally settled into his afternoon nap, and I'd planned to tackle the mountain of laundry waiting upstairs. I wiped my hands on my apron and headed for the door, expecting the usual package delivery. Instead, I found myself face to face with a woman who looked vaguely familiar. Tall, impeccably dressed in a cream blazer, her dark hair falling in perfect waves. The kind of woman who belongs on a magazine cover, not on my front porch on a Tuesday afternoon. Michelle Thompson? Her voice was steady, confident. I'm Sophie Grant. We need to talk about Ryan. My stomach dropped. I knew that name. I'd seen it pop up on Ryan's phone a few times, always dismissed with a quick, just a client when I'd asked. The way she said my husband's name, though. There was an intimacy there that made my fingers curl against the doorframe. I'm sorry, but Ryan's at work, I said, moving to close the door. You can reach him at the office. I know exactly where Ryan is. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times. He's at the Riverside Hotel, room 412, same as every Tuesday afternoon for the past 8 months. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the doorframe harder, my knuckles turning white. I think you should leave. Look. She held up her phone. The screen showed Ryan, my Ryan, kissing this woman in what looked like a restaurant. Another swipe. Them on a beach, his arm around her waist. Another, in bed, his face peaceful in sleep, the same expression I'd watched countless mornings. Stop. The word came out like a plea. I'm not here to hurt you, Sophie said, lowering her phone. I thought I was the only one until last week. Then I found out about you, about Dylan, about the mortgage payments he's been making on my condo while telling me he was separated. The smell of burning cheese suddenly filled the air. The lasagna. I turned mechanically toward the kitchen, Sophie following me inside uninvited. I pulled out the slightly blackened dish, set it on the counter. The mundane action felt surreal, like I was moving through water. Why are you here? I asked, still staring at the ruined dinner. Why tell me? Because we both deserve better than his lies. She placed a manila envelope on my counter. Here's everything. Photos, messages, bank statements, hotel receipts. Use it however you want. A cry from upstairs made us both freeze. Dylan, awake from his nap? The sound snapped me back to reality, reminded me who I was, who I needed to be. Get out, I said, my voice finding its strength. Now, Sophie nodded, almost sympathetic. One more thing. He's planning to leave you next month. Already has the papers drawn up. I thought you should know. She walked out, heels clicking against my hardwood floors. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed through my suddenly hollow home. Upstairs, Dylan called again. Mama, I looked at the envelope on my counter, then at my wedding photo hanging on the wall. Ryan's smile, the one I'd fallen in love with, now seemed more like a smirk. 8 years of marriage reduced to a manila envelope of betrayals. Dylan's cries grew more insistent. I touched my wedding ring, twisted it once, then pulled it off. It made a small, final sound as it hit the counter. Coming, baby. I called upstairs, my mind already racing with what needed to be done. Ryan would be home in 3 hours, expecting his perfect family, his perfect life. He had no idea what was waiting for him. I spent 3 hours memorizing every detail in that manila envelope, arranging the evidence of my shattered life on our bedroom floor while Dylan played with his blocks nearby. Each photo, each receipt, each loving message between my husband and his other life felt like another nail in a coffin I hadn't known I was lying in. When Ryan's key turned in the front door at exactly 6:30, I had everything back in the envelope, tucked safely in my mother's house across town. Dylan squealed, "Dada," from his playpen, and I watched Ryan scoop him up, plant kisses on his chubby cheeks, perform his role of devoted father perfectly. "Something smells good," he said, walking into the kitchen where I stood at the counter, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. "New recipe? How was the Riverside Hotel?" I kept chopping, not looking up. "Room 412 meet your standards?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even Dylan, still in Ryan's arms, seemed to sense the shift in the air. When I finally looked up, Ryan's face had that careful blank expression I'd seen him use with difficult clients. "Michelle, what are you talking about?" "Don't." The knife came down harder than necessary, splitting a carrot in two. "Sophie Grant was here today. Interesting woman. Great taste in blazers, even better taste in evidence." Ryan set Dylan down, who immediately toddled off to his toys. "Whatever she told you. 8 months. My voice cracked slightly. "Every Tuesday afternoon. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you just not care enough to hide it better?" "It's not what you think." He stepped closer, reaching for my hand. I pointed the knife at him and he froze. "Baby, please, let me explain." "Explain what? The condo you're paying for? The divorce papers you've already drawn up?" Each word felt like glass in my throat. "Or maybe explain how you've been playing house with her son while ours naps every afternoon?" His face changed then, something darker replacing the careful mask. "You went through my things?" I laughed, the sound harsh and foreign. "No, Ryan. Sophie did that for me. Turns out she didn't appreciate finding out about your wife and son any more than I appreciated learning about your girlfriend and her kid. This is exactly why I—" He caught himself, but not before I saw it. That flash of blame in his eyes. "Why you what? Why you decided to throw away 8 years of marriage? Why you've been lying to my face every single day?" I set the knife down before the temptation to use it became too strong. "Go ahead. Finish that sentence." Instead, he pulled out his phone, turning away slightly. I caught a glimpse of Sophie's name on the screen before he walked into the living room, speaking in low, urgent tones. I followed, fury building with each step. "Are you seriously calling her right now?" He held up a finger, the universal wait gesture he used to silence difficult clients. That's when something in me snapped. I grabbed his phone and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, pieces of screen scattering across our perfect hardwood floors. Dylan started crying from his playpen, but for once I didn't immediately run to comfort him. "Jesus Christ, Michelle." Ryan stared at his broken phone, then at me like I was a stranger. "Have you lost your mind?" "No," I said, eerily calm now. "But I've found something better. Clarity." I walked to Dylan's playpen, lifted him out, and headed for the stairs. "We're staying at my mother's tonight. Don't bother calling." "Oh, wait, you can't." "Michelle, stop. We need to talk about this like adults." I turned on the stairs, Dylan's tear-stained face pressed against my neck. "Adults? Like how you've been adulting with Sophie every Tuesday? Or how adult it was to plan your escape while playing Happy Family?" "I never meant, save it for your girlfriend." I continued up the stairs. "Or better yet, save it for your lawyer. because that's who you'll be talking to from now on. His voice followed me up. You're being hysterical. This isn't you. You're right, I called back, throwing some of Dylan's things into a bag. The old me would have believed whatever lie you're about to tell. But that Michelle? She died today in room 412. Lily's office always smelled like leather and coffee, a combination that usually calmed me. Not today. I sat across from her desk, Dylan asleep in his stroller beside me while she scrolled through Ryan's financial records on her computer screen. This is worse than we thought, she said, turning the monitor toward me. He's been moving money around for months. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers starting about 6 months ago. I leaned forward, the numbers swimming before my eyes. How much? Nearly $200,000. Lily's voice hardened. All going to an account under Sophie Grant's name. The room tilted slightly. That was our safety net. Our future. Dylan's college fund. He told me the market was down, that our investments needed time to recover. The market's fine. Your husband's morality, however. Lily started typing rapidly. There's more. The condo he bought for her? It's in both their names. A knock at the door made us both jump. Mark Davis, Ryan's best friend, stepped in without waiting for an answer. The sight of him in his expensive suit, with that familiar apologetic smile, made my stomach turn. Michelle, he said, closing the door behind him. Ryan's worried sick. He's been trying to reach you for days. I'm in a private meeting with my lawyer, I said, gesturing to Lily. You can tell Ryan. He's not the bad guy here. Mark held up his hands. Look, Sophie's been causing problems for months. Ryan was trying to handle it quietly, protect everyone involved. Lily stood up slowly. Mark, as Michelle's legal counsel, I advise you to leave. Did Ryan send you to spy on me? The question came out sharp enough to make Dylan stir in his sleep. Or did you volunteer? Mark's expression shifted, something calculating replacing the concern. You should know there are things about Sophie that would change how you see this situation. Like what? That she has a son? That Ryan's been playing daddy to him while stealing from his own child's future? I pulled out my phone, showed him the photo of Ryan with Sophie and her son at what looked like a school event. Or maybe you mean how he's been building a whole second life while destroying this one. That money was to keep her quiet. Mark blurted. She was threatening to go public, ruin his career. Ryan was protecting you. Lily's laugh was cold. By buying her a condo and setting up joint accounts, that's an interesting definition of protection. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. I stood up, my voice steady despite the rage burning through me. Ryan wasn't protecting anyone but himself. And you've been helping him, haven't you? Covering for him at those business dinners, lying to my face every time I called looking for him? Mark's silence was answer enough. Get out, Lily said, moving between us. Before I call security. After he left, I collapsed back into the chair, my hands shaking. Ryan's already spinning his version of events. Let him. Lily returned to her computer. Because while he's doing that, we're going to follow the money. Every transfer, every purchase, every lie he tried to hide. She paused, looking at me carefully. But Michelle, once we start this, there's no going back. Ryan won't just lose his reputation. He could face serious legal consequences. I looked at Dylan, peaceful in his sleep, unaware that his world was crumbling. Then I thought of Tom, Sophie's son, another innocent caught in Ryan's web of lies. The fury that had been building since Sophie's visit crystallized into something colder, more focused. Ryan's been playing both sides, thinking he's too smart to get caught, I said, turning back to Lily. He used our money to build his perfect escape, convinced everyone to help keep his secrets. Now it's my turn. What are you thinking? I pulled out the manila envelope Sophie had given me, along with a USB drive I'd found hidden in Ryan's office. I'm thinking it's time to show him what it feels like when everything you've built comes crashing down. Lily smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. Then let's get to work. My mother found me in her guest bathroom at 3 a.m, scrubbing the already spotless tiles with violent determination. She didn't say anything, just sat on the edge of the tub and waited. The only sounds were Dylan's soft breathing through the baby monitor and the harsh scratch of the brush against ceramic. I keep thinking about all the times I cleaned our house while he was with her. I finally said, my knuckles white around the brush handle. Every surface I made perfect for him to come home to. Michelle. Mom's voice was gentle, but I heard the steel underneath. Put down the brush. I did, but my hands kept moving, searching for something to fix, to control. Did you know Ryan called the school today? Tried to convince them to let him substitute teach your old literature class? What? The steel in her voice became razor sharp. He's trying to preserve his image, the caring husband, the devoted father, the pillar of the community. I laughed, the sound echoing harshly off the bathroom walls. He even volunteered to coach Little League. That manipulative little... A knock at the front door cut her off. We both froze, listening. It was followed by another knock, more insistent. Stay here, Mom said, but I was already moving. Through the peephole, I saw Sophie, looking nothing like the polished woman who'd appeared on my doorstep days ago. Her mascara was smeared, her perfect hair disheveled. I opened the door. It's 3 a.m. Ryan's engaged. The words tumbled out of her. To neither of us. Her name's Amanda. They've been together for months. The world didn't tilt this time. It shattered. What? Sophie thrust her phone at me. On the screen was a private Instagram account showing Ryan at what looked like an intimate dinner. His arm was around a redhead I'd never seen before. The caption read, "Finally said yes to forever. Jiri's engaged. My forever." The post is from 2 hours ago, Sophie said. I only found it because her best friend follows my yoga studio's account. My mother appeared beside me, taking in Sophie's desperate state. Come inside before the neighbors start talking. In the kitchen, Sophie's hands shook as she pulled up more photos. Ryan and Amanda at Christmas. Ryan and Amanda on vacation. Ryan and Amanda looking at houses. He told me you were the obstacle, Sophie said, her voice breaking. That once the divorce was final, we could be together properly. But he told her I was just a client who got obsessed with him. And you... She looked at me. You don't even exist in her world. How long? The question felt like ground glass in my throat. The timestamps on these photos. Sophie scrolled through her phone. At least a year, before he even met me. My mother's hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard. You said she's looking at houses with him? Sophie nodded. In the same development where he bought my condo, using the same real estate company. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The missing money, the elaborate lies, the careful compartmentalization of his various lives. It wasn't just about affairs or escape plans. He's been running a scam, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The development, the real estate company. He's been using his relationships to sell properties, hasn't he? Sophie's eyes widened. The investment opportunity he kept talking about. He said if I just put in a little more money. How much? Mom asked sharply. Everything I had. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. My savings, my son's college fund, even a second mortgage on my parents' house. The baby monitor crackled with Dylan's soft whimpers. The sound crystallized everything. My rage, my pain, my purpose. We need to call Lily, I said, standing up. Right now. Why? Sophie asked. Because this isn't about affairs anymore. It's about fraud. I looked at the photos again, at Ryan's practice smile, the same one he'd used on all of us. And we're going to make sure he never does this to anyone else. The sun was rising by the time we finished making our plans, painting the kitchen in shades of gold that felt like a promise. Or maybe a warning. The restaurant buzzed with Friday night energy as I watched Ryan charm his way through another business dinner. He hadn't noticed me yet, sitting alone at the corner table, nursing a glass of wine I hadn't touched. His arm was around Amanda, the ring on her finger catching the light as she laughed at something he'd said. 3 other couples sat at their table. All potential buyers for the new development, according to Lily's investigation. all about to invest their life savings in Ryan's elaborate house of cards. My phone vibrated. Sophie. We're in position. Mark just arrived at the office. I checked my watch. Right on schedule. While Ryan played his role here, Lily and a forensic accountant were meeting Mark at the real estate office, armed with enough evidence to make him choose between loyalty to Ryan and saving his own skin. Ready? Another text, this time from Mom, who was watching Dylan. I typed back, yes. Standing up, I smoothed down my black dress, the one Ryan had always loved, and walked toward their table. Amanda saw me first, her smile faltering as she tried to place my face. Then Ryan looked up, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw real fear in his eyes. Ryan, darling, I said, loud enough to carry. Aren't you going to introduce me to your fiancé? The table went silent. Amanda's hand flew to her throat, touching the necklace I recognized from our 10th anniversary. Ryan, who is this? Nobody, he said quickly, standing. Michelle, let's talk outside. I'm his wife, I said, pulling out my phone. Well, current wife, though I suppose that makes me the nobody in this scenario. I turned to the other couples. I assume you're all here about investing in Riverside Heights? Ryan grabbed my arm. Stop this, now. I shook him off. You might want to check the news first. It seems there are some irregularities with the development company. The FBI is particularly interested in the pattern of investment fraud. She's lying, Ryan said, but the couples were already pulling out their phones. This is just a domestic dispute. My phone rang. I answered on speaker. Yes, Lily? It's done. My lawyer's voice rang clear. Mark Davis just finished his statement to the investigators. They're executing the search warrant now. The color drained from Ryan's face. Amanda stood up, backing away from him. Ryan, what's happening? Would you like to tell her? I asked him. Or should I? About Sophie, perhaps? Or the other women? The houses you sold them with money that never went to the development? I turned to Amanda. Check your investment account. The one he convinced you to create for your future together. I'm betting it's empty. She fumbled with her phone, hands shaking. The horror dawning on her face told me everything. You're ruining everything, Ryan hissed, his charm cracking to reveal something ugly underneath. No, you did that yourself. I'm just making sure you can't ruin anyone else's life. The restaurant manager appeared, drawn by the commotion. Behind him, I spotted 2 men in suits entering, right on schedule. Mr. Thompson? One called out. FBI, we need you to come with us. Ryan's eyes darted around like a trapped animal's. For a moment, I thought he might run. Instead, he straightened his tie, that familiar mask sliding back into place. This is all a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. I can explain everything. As they led him away, Amanda threw her ring at him, the diamond bouncing off his perfectly pressed shirt. The other couples huddled together, shock and anger mixing on their faces as they realized how close they'd come to losing everything. I sat back down at my corner table, finally taking a sip of my wine. My phone lit up with a message from Sophie. Is it done? Yes, I typed back. He'll never hurt anyone again. The wine tasted bitter, victory mixing with something else. Not regret exactly, but a hollow feeling where satisfaction should have been. I thought it would feel different watching him fall. Instead, I just felt tired. My phone buzzed again. Mom had sent a photo of Dylan sleeping, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. That's when the tears finally came. Not for Ryan, or the life we'd lost, but for the future we'd saved. The courthouse hallway felt endless as I walked toward the hearing room, my heels echoing against marble floors. Behind me, I heard the whispers, felt the stares. Ryan's arrest had made headlines, and now everyone knew the story, or thought they did. I pushed open the heavy doors, and there he sat, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual designer suit. The sight should have been satisfying. Instead, it made my stomach turn. Mrs. Thompson, his lawyer called out, intercepting me before I could sit down. A moment, in the corner, Ryan watched us with that familiar, calculating expression. I'd seen that look before. when negotiating house prices, when convincing clients to invest, when promising Sophie and Amanda their perfect futures. "We have a proposition," the lawyer said quietly. "One that could benefit everyone." Everyone meaning Ryan? Meaning Dylan. He paused, letting that sink in. "My client is willing to sign over all his assets, make a full confession, if you agree to supervised visitation." The room tilted slightly. "He's using our son as a bargaining chip?" "He's trying to make things right." A commotion at the door drew our attention. Sophie burst in, her face pale. "Michelle, wait. There's something you need to know." The lawyer tried to intervene, but Sophie pushed past him. "He's done it before. In Seattle, 5 years ago. Different names, different development, same scheme." Her voice cracked. "A woman killed herself when she lost everything. Her daughter was Tom's age." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I looked at Ryan, searching for any sign of remorse, any crack in his perfect mask. He just smiled. That same charming smile that had convinced me, convinced all of us, that he was something he never was. "Your Honor," his lawyer started, but I cut him off. "No deals." My voice sounded strange, distant. "No visitation, no mercy," Ryan finally spoke, his voice carrying across the room. "You're going to tell our son his father's in prison? That's your idea of protecting him? Better than letting him grow up thinking lies are love." I turned to the judge. "I'd like to make a statement." But before I could speak, Mark Davis burst into the courtroom, clutching papers. "Stop. Everything he told you about Seattle was a lie. There's more, so much more." The next hour passed in a blur of revelations. 3 cities, dozens of victims, millions stolen. With each new detail, I felt myself shrinking, drowning in the magnitude of what Ryan had done, what I had failed to see. Later, in the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the horror of it all. The door opened and Amanda stepped in, her engagement ring gone. "I thought I knew him," she said quietly. We all did. That was his gift. My reflection looked haunted, hollow, making us see what we wanted to see. "The investigators found something else," Amanda said. "In his private email, plans for after the arrest, for Dylan." My heart stopped. "What plans?" "He has money hidden overseas, and people willing to—" She couldn't finish. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Ryan wasn't just trying to negotiate visitation. He was setting up an escape plan, with our son as leverage. I fumbled for my phone, called my mother. No answer. Called home. Nothing. "Dylan's at daycare," Amanda said quickly, seeing my panic. "I checked before coming here. He's safe." "But for how long?" The question echoed in my head as I ran from the courthouse, my carefully planned revenge crumbling around me. I'd thought exposing Ryan would end this. Instead, I'd just given him nothing left to lose. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have taken the deal." In that moment, standing in the courthouse parking lot with my world collapsing again, I realized the true cost of revenge. It wasn't just about exposing lies or seeking justice anymore. It was about protecting what mattered most, and I just made that infinitely harder. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. The safe house felt like a cage, even with the FBI agents posted outside. Dylan slept in the next room while I paced, watching shadows move across unfamiliar walls. 3 days since Ryan's threat. 3 days of protective custody, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My phone buzzed. A text from an encrypted number Lily had set up. Movement on the offshore accounts. Large withdrawal in Singapore. Another buzz. Security breach at the courthouse. Ryan's gone. The bedroom door creaked. I spun around, heart racing, but it was just Sophie, her face ghost white in the darkness. "They found Mark," she whispered, "in his car. He's alive, but—" A crash from Dylan's room cut her off. Before I could move, the window exploded inward and 2 figures in black burst through. I lunged for Dylan's room, but strong arms caught me from behind. "Hello, Michelle?" Ryan's voice, smooth as ever. "Miss me?" The overhead lights flickered on. Ryan stood in the doorway wearing a guard's uniform, his perfect mask finally cracked around the edges. Two men held Sophie against the wall. Through the broken window, I saw the FBI agent slumped on the ground. "Dylan stays asleep," Ryan said quietly. "Or this gets messy." "How did you—" "Money talks, especially to underpaid federal agents." He stepped closer, that familiar smile twisting into something cruel. "You should have taken the deal. You're not taking him." My voice stayed steady, even as fear clawed at my throat. "Actually, I am. But first—" He pulled out a stack of papers. "You're going to sign these. Full custody, no visitation, no contact. Your choice whether Dylan grows up thinking his mother abandoned him or died trying to stop me." Sophie made a small sound, and one of the men pressed harder against her throat. "You really think you can disappear?" I asked, playing for time. "Every law enforcement agency in the country? We'll be chasing shadows while we're living comfortably in a country with no extradition treaty." Ryan's eyes flickered to Dylan's room. "He'll forget you eventually. Children are adaptable." Something inside me shifted, a clarity cutting through the fear. I saw Ryan clearly for the first time. Not the charming mask or the calculating monster, but something smaller, desperate. "You know what your mistake was?" I asked, taking a step forward. "Not the affairs or the fraud or even the threats. It was thinking you knew me." His smile faltered slightly. The old Michelle would have been paralyzed by fear right now, would have signed anything to keep the peace. Another step. "But you created this version of me, the one who learned to play the long game." A sound outside, car doors closing. Ryan's head turned slightly. "You taught me how to set a trap," I continued. "How to make someone so focused on one threat they miss the real danger." Shouts erupted outside. Ryan's men moved toward the window, dragging Sophie with them. "The offshore accounts?" I smiled. "A trail we wanted you to follow. The courthouse breach? Staged. Even the FBI agents outside were actors. The real team's been waiting for my signal since you walked in." The door burst open. Real agents poured in, weapons raised. Ryan lunged for Dylan's room, but I was already there, blocking his path. "You're right about one thing," I said as they took him down. "Children are adaptable. Dylan will forget you. And that's the best gift I could give him." Later, as dawn broke over the safe house, I sat with Sophie while the FBI processed the scene. "How did you know he'd come himself?" she asked. "Because he couldn't stand that someone else had outplayed him. His ego wouldn't let him trust anyone else to fix it." Dylan stirred in his sleep, clutching his stuffed elephant. I touched the small transmitter hidden inside it, the one that had been broadcasting everything to the FBI since Ryan's first threat. "The thing about revenge," I said quietly, "is knowing when to let it go. Sometimes the best victory is just making sure they can never hurt anyone again." Sophie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "What now?" I watched the sun rise, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Now we rebuild, but this time on our terms, not his." The envelope arrived on a crisp autumn morning, just as Dylan was mastering his first complete sentence. I recognized Sophie's handwriting immediately, though I hadn't heard from her since the trial. "Mama, look." Dylan pointed at a falling leaf while I opened the letter, his other hand gripping the playground railing. The park had become our sanctuary, a place where the whispers and stares couldn't reach us. Sophie's words blurred on the page. "I'm moving to Seattle with Tom. Starting over where Ryan first began his schemes feels right somehow, like closing a circle. The victims' families there. They deserve to know the truth, to heal." A child's laughter drew my attention. Tom was pushing Dylan on the swing, both boys oblivious to the weight of their shared history. Sophie had brought him for one last play date before their move. "They'll forget," Sophie said, appearing beside me. "That's what everyone keeps telling me. That Tom will forget Ryan, the promises, the pain." "But we won't," I replied, watching our sons play. No. She handed me a newspaper clipping. Ryan's sentencing. 20 years, no possibility of early release. I heard he tried to charm the judge at the end. Some speech about redemption. Old habits. I folded the clipping without reading it. Did it work? The judge called him a predator in a prince's clothing. Sophie smiled slightly. Your testimony sealed it. The way you described his methods, his manipulation, it helped the other victims come forward. Dylan ran over, leaves stuck in his curls. Mama, swing. As I pushed him higher, I thought about Ryan's last words to me in court. You'll never truly be free of me. He'd meant it as a threat, but watching Dylan laugh, fearless and pure, I realized Ryan had given me something he never intended. Strength I never knew I had. The support group is helping, Sophie said when I returned. The other families, they understand. No judgment. Just healing. Is that why you're really going to Seattle? She nodded. They need someone who understands both sides, victim and accomplice. Her voice caught. I have to make it right. Tom called out to her, proud of something he'd found. The way she looked at him, fierce love mixed with lingering guilt, mirrored what I felt every time Dylan asked about his father. We protected them in the end, I said. That's what matters. You protected everyone. I just wish... She trailed off, watching Tom. I wish I'd been stronger sooner. I thought about the day Sophie first appeared on my doorstep, how that moment had shattered my world and ultimately rebuilt it stronger. We were strong exactly when we needed to be. Later, after they'd left for their new life across the country, I found a second letter in the envelope. This one was addressed to Dylan, marked, "For when he's older." I didn't read it. Instead, I placed it in the box where I kept the important things. Dylan's first drawing, the key to our new house, the business card for my recently launched consulting firm. Not to preserve the pain, but to remember the strength that grew from it. Dylan tugged at my sleeve, ready for his afternoon nap. As I carried him home, he pointed at a bird soaring overhead. Free, he said, one of his new favorite words. I held him closer, thinking about Ryan's threat of never being free. He'd been wrong about that, just like he'd been wrong about so many things. Freedom wasn't about forgetting the past or even forgiving it. It was about choosing your own path forward, even when that path was harder than the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. Yes, baby, I whispered to Dylan as he drifted off to sleep. We're free. And for the first time since this all began, I truly believed it.